Welcome to Brain Strength, the series where this average jabroni does a couple athletic things every now and then, while also teaching you a thing or two about sports psych and related concepts along the way. I'm your host, RJ Lynch, mental performance consultant, and with my master's in sports psychology, let's get this on the road. So in this episode of Brain Strength, I'm going to focus in on an issue that can arise in sports. I'm going to be focused on what's called the Female Athlete Triad. Now, there's a couple of caveats I quick want to make before I go into this. The first one being that I am not a female. I've never gone through these things. So
let me get this straight. You're not a woman?
No.
it's very easy to look at and be like, why is this guy talking about it? He is not relevant to the problem, has never experienced it, can't understand what it's like to deal with the things going through here. And you're right, I can't. I don't know what it's like. But I think it's very important just giving the space that coaching is, the amount of male coaches that coach female athletes, the amount of males that work with females in some degree in this space, that it is very important to understand the conversation, to have the conversation, to normalize it so that we're more likely to have it and detect it with our athletes. And then the other caveat with that is I'm not a master of the biology behind all of these things. Let's say my master's was in sports psych, and though my undergrad was in exercise and sports science, my nat phys biology is not as great as others, so I'm not going to be going into deep details on what's going on here, all the mechanisms in that degree. I want to make sure people are aware of it, looking for this, seeing how we can start going at it from the mental side and improve the lives of our athletes. With that said, the very first thing we have to do is understand what is the female triad, especially for those of you who have never heard of it, whether you're an athlete or coach or somewhere in between there. The first piece to it is low energy availability. Usually with the female athlete triad, there is excess exercise and limited nutrition going into their body. So if we work from the caloric model for both weight and energy, it's the idea that calories are energy. We need them to do things. And the more we bring in, the more energy we can expend. If we have more than we expend, then we put on weight, whether it's muscle or fat, depending on other factors in there. We take in fewer calories or we expend more than we consume. We start losing weight, we start losing things, and then depending on how big the deficit is, how much is going on in there, we can have other issues that arise. That's why you'll see a lot of times, even for people who are strategic about their diets, be it bodybuilders or so, going into a prep, as they get closer to that final competition where they're very much restricting that energy intake while still keeping their output high, they're just sluggish. All these things are kind of going wrong. Their body's starting to have issues. Now, one thing that gets commonly associated with this is the idea of eating disorders, whether it is anorexia, bulimia, anything like that. That can happen a lot, and that can be one of the reasons we fall in the triad, but you don't have to have an eating disorder to be in the triad. You just have to have that extreme lack of energy from either too much exercise compared to what you're taking in, or just not taking in a whole lot. Next up, which kind of usually gets wrapped into that too much exercise, too little food thing, is menstrual dysfunction. So whether you are completely absent of a period in what's called, I'm going to butcher this, but I'm going to give it a try, amenorrhea. If you know that it's not a baby coming that you're missing your period, then it's a good sign that you're starting to fall into that female triad, you're starting to fall into issues. Prior to that, though, you're usually going to have other irregularities. It's just becoming aware of that, noticing that. I've known athletes who have unfortunately gone several months without their period or so, and it's a dark sign of what's going on, both mentally, physically, and everything in between. As I mentioned before, with the low energy piece, if we are not taking enough food, not taking enough stuff, what our body is trying to do is it's trying to go into survival mode, and it's starting to cut out all the things it doesn't need. And if we keep pushing something like athletics that is definitely not a necessity by means, but we keep pushing our body through those things. Our body just has to make cuts elsewhere, and it happens with our menstruation for females. And then that starts messing with hormones, starts messing with the brain function, starts changing things that way, and it just creates this cycle, this snowball downhill that eventually can lead to a complete crash. And then the final piece is decreased bone mineral density. So if we are not taking a lot of food, if we're not doing the whole lot, we're exercising too heavily, what happens is that the nutrients, the minerals that would go into how strong your bones are, such as calcium, your milk, things like that, have to go elsewhere. They have to do something else that the body considers more vital, like breathing, heart pumping, digesting it all, anything like that. It's trying to send any resources it can just to keep your body from melting into a pile of goo on the floor. So what happens is the bones become brittle, they become easier to break, things start happening, you start having fractures in feet, legs, anything like that, especially joints get very weak as well here, and you just start falling apart piece by piece. So now that you understand what the triad is, I want to take a deeper look into the people that are most affected. There's three big categories I say are probably the most seen or the most understood for being susceptible to the female athlete triad. The first is endurance-based sports. Cross country, distance, swimming, anything like that. So if I were to have you picture a cross country runner or a distance swimmer, the first image that probably comes to your mind is this string bean human being who's like skin, bones, generally a little bit taller, very lean. And why do we picture that? Because A, that's what's found to be most beneficial. At times, the less mass you're carrying, the less pounding you're going to put on as you're running 2, 3, 4, 5 miles at a time, 23 miles or so. The less that you have, the less extra you're carrying around, the easier it is to keep pushing through. If you're just muscle and bone, you can go without the fat carrying you back. So they tend to eat less because they think, oh, I need to be this or that. My coaches are telling me I have to lose weight if I want to be faster. All these things start happening, and it just becomes a big area. So let's say on average, people eat 2,000 calories daily recommend, right? It's a kind of arbitrary number they came up with, but we all know that 2,000 number, so I'm going to use it. Most athletes, especially when they get into high school where their body's growing at rapid paces, they're doing things all the time between walking to classes, practice, lifting, all these things going on, stress, increasing calorie needs. What starts happening is if most athletes are somewhere in that 3 to 3,500 range, distance runners tend to go even higher. I know plenty of distance runners that probably eat the same amount of food as linemen, throwers, not because they're trying to put on weight like the throwers are, but because they're just trying to fuel their body after running for an hour and a half that day in the hot sun. They're trying to refuel. Well, once again, because of culture, because the way things are looked at, female athletes in particular think people will look at them if they have 3-4 plates there that they need to refuel themselves based on what they burned. So they'll only take 1 plate of a big salad. It's great if you're trying to lose weight, but based on where they're at, they need more and more, and they just don't take it in. The next category is the judged sports, the sports that have judges, get numbers put up based on how things appear. This is one where a lot of times those eating disorders come in a lot, and these ones would be like gymnastics, diving, ice skaters. As I'm recording this, the Olympics are just starting to think synchronized swimming, things like this where they're being watched intently, generally in very skimpy outfits where everything's pretty visible. Things are very well seen for a lot of their body. So what happens is when you're in these judged sports, because you're already being judged on the look of the performance, the brain starts associating this idea of performance look with how you look. And unfortunately, culturally, this has also happened of thin skaters, just because of how ice skating is, get looked at more favorable than bigger muscular skaters. And even for doing the same performances, might get better scores. So what happens? The athletes start saying like, all right, I gotta be thinner, I gotta do this, all these things start, so they eat less, they work out more, they become thinner, and their body just, once again, goes into that survival mode. just shutting down things that unfortunately also then affects the hormones, affects the brain chemistry even more. Next up, we've got athletes with some kind of predisposition, the culture of the sport, the culture that they live in, whether you're an American, if you're from India, if you're from Japan, from Russia, the culture you grow up in is going to determine maybe how you look at your body or how you should be. So then you take that into sports, it gets brought up to some degree. Genetics, if I recall, there are some links to certain eating disorders, certain ways of how you look at your body. So if you have some of this genetic predisposition, then you're going to be more likely to fall into this. If the mother of the female athlete is suffering from eating disorders, there's a better chance that got passed along to the child. And then that goes into upbringing. If you got brought up in one of those households with very strict diets where you're told females are supposed to look a certain way, supposed to be this dainty so, and you got a shoe thrown at you if you put too much food in your mouth, you're going to have a better chance of falling into things. So those are the three big categories, but at the end of the day, anyone can fall into this. And that's the thing that we have to very much recognize, is it can happen to any of the athletes that we work with. Or if you are an athlete, it can happen to you. So what are the beginning signs? So the first one that kind of already goes into the triad itself are the physical. So menstrual irregularities. So like I said, before it goes missing, usually it has changes that are not normal or changes in the amount of flow that you're used to, the symptoms of the menstrual cycle that you suffer from, whether it's severe to light, those things will start to change. There'll be severe weight shifts. So if you have an athlete it's usually right around that 160 range, and all of a sudden a couple weeks later they're down to 145, and then they're back up to 159. They keep going back and forth like that. Maybe not even that severe, but I'm using that as a better example. Something is amiss. Something has to be monitored there. Frequent injuries and slow recoveries. If you're getting injuries in your feet, if you're getting shin issues a lot, things like this, they're just occurring over and over again. Even with muscles, if your hamstrings keep going off on you, your shoulder, your delts, your traps, your biceps, triceps, if all these things keep getting injured and are not healing that fast, well, what is healing? Healing is the calories, the food that we're consuming, being sent to those muscles as the energy, as pieces in the blood, as parts to recover. But think of it this way. If you're going to eat, let's use chicken, and all you have is just a little bit of that chicken that day, do you think your body wants to send the energy, the protein, the fat, everything like that from the chicken to your heart or lungs in order for them to pump and breathe? Or do you think it's going to prefer to send that to the muscle that it kind of needs, but can wait to heal or doesn't need as much in that time? Your body's going to send the protein and all that to the muscles like the heart that need to pump in order for you to survive. So if you're not healing very fast, if you're falling apart, there's your sign. Next one would be psychological. In order for your brain to function properly, it needs certain nutrients, minerals, vitamins, all these things that go into different parts of the brain. And if you are not getting enough of those, you're going to start having things like mood shifts, depression, anxiety. Your brain's going to start seeing things weird. You're going to have those moments where life's going to get hazy. You're going to be going through like you're in a fog. And also you can start noticing if they're very occupied with their food, weight, body. If all your athlete can talk about is how much food they're bringing, how their body looks, it's a good sign things are going wrong, that there's something haywire up there. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is one of those ones where my field specifically as a mental performance consultant with a master's degree isn't always the most beneficial one to go to. This is one of those ones we're looking at a certified counselor or full doctoral level psychologist for clinical issues might be your best option depending on where we're at. Now, there are some things that I or those like me can do, but just be aware that if you're hoping to just talk to the mental performance consultant, get all these things fixed, you're probably going to have multiple people helping. Next up, going along with the physical, the psychological, if you can't tell, don't see those, usually behavioral things will show. So you're going to be eating in odd, unhealthy ways. We focus too much on all they have is spinach and lettuce for 3 meals a day. A, it's not balanced, doesn't get you enough of everything you need, and B, that would just suck. The next thing is excessive exercise or improper recovery. Well, this one might be the athlete that we see has practice, has weights, but then goes to another gym on their own time and gets on the treadmill for an hour, the stair stepper for 20 minutes every day afterwards. If you're a strength coach and you find your athletes all around doing things that you didn't recommend or coaches didn't recommend or haven't been told to do, here's your sign.
Here's your sign.
I mentioned how some of these issues might be beyond what mental performance consultants can do, but there are some roles that people like myself can help athletes or would be working with athletes on. First one is education and awareness. What I'm doing now, instead of talking with the athlete themselves and working through these things like, hey, this is some of the stuff, what's kind of going on. We can be monitoring them. Usually in my field, we're a little bit separate from coaching staffs. We're separate from parents. Keep things very private. A lot of times we could be the first people to just ask an athlete like, hey, is something wrong here? Or if we're talking, having conversations with them, we can notice mood shifts a little bit faster than in practice, where sometimes athletes just have mood shifts because practice sucks that day. Or it's just sitting one-on-one with me at conversation. If all of a sudden one week you're happy, go lucky, positive all the time, and the next week it's death, gloom, darkness, there's something I'd be looking at. And then we can have you do tracking, thought log journals, those self-talk pieces to start noticing like, hey, you seem to be mentioning I'm a fat slag a lot. Maybe we should look at this and have conversations of how to stop ourselves from saying that and being more neutral or positive. Goal setting. So by having a decent idea of where an athlete wants to be, we can take their mind away from the food and excess exercise piece to the other stuff. I'm thinking back to earlier in the conversation, I mentioned how judge sports, endurance sports, they start thinking like, hey, this is what I need to be this look. Well, let's take cross country as an example. Based on what I know from the exercise sports science background, in theory, less mass means you have less resistance, but more muscle, more strength can also allow you to put more force into the ground, which can make you go faster as well. So if by shifting them from thinking I need to be less to no, you need to be stronger, you can slowly start to get at some of those things. In addition, some goal setting stuff I always talk about is happiness. And if I can have a real conversation with an athlete of, all right, this goal that you have of being this 10 out of 10 gymnast, is that going to make you happy? Or are you happy chasing that? And if their answer right now is they're miserable, they're exhausted all the time, we can readjust those goals to slowly get you from going too far down the hill. Next up is just helping them build that support network or having conversations with the people around you. So ideally, you'd want parents, coaches, and all that to be supportive of you, to be these people that you can look to and be like, hey, I'm good how I am. I don't need to lose weight and all that. But if you have a coach or parents that are telling you, you need to lose weight, you're a fat piece of crap, then we have to learn how to have proper conversations with them or cut them out of our life. And that's something that mental performance consultants can do to a degree, as well as other psychologists. Then finally, just help balance training. And this can depend on the mental performance consultant you work with. Because of my background in coaching, my background in strength training, I do some work with athletes where it's kind of looking at the plus minuses, where are we doing too much at? Where are we overemphasizing or destroying ourselves? Where can we cut things out? Where can we have conversations with coaches of like, hey, doing this is leading me to this, and I don't want to get to the point where I am depressed, anxious, missing my period. So those are conversations I'll have, things I'll have athletes do. The exact drills can vary depending on the person, but those are a lot of things there. As a coach or as the support network, what's your role? What can you do? As an athlete right now who has other athletes on the team, what are the things? First one's role modeling. How are you talking about weight? How are you talking about food? Are you the coach that's pretty thin or the parent that's pretty thin and saying like, man, I'm a lazy piece of crap. I've gotten so fat and bloated. And meanwhile, you're at 16% body fat and look better than 99% of the people out there. How are you having that conversation? And even if you are a bit large, like, are you happy? Because if you can be happy at whatever body weight piece you are there, whatever fat percentage, it shows your athletes that it's okay to just be who you are. Or placing them with other athletes that you know are a little bit older, have gone through some of these things and are pretty solid and know how to approach things right. Let's say you're a college coach. You have the senior All-American, eats right, does all these things, is great. Can you pair them with the athlete that's eating one meal a day, thinks all things are bad, so that they can watch this All-American eat 3 plates at dinner and another 5 snacks throughout the day to see like, hey, food's good for you. It helps me perform well. It's going to help you perform well as well. The next thing is have open conversations. Just in general, be willing to talk and not shut down athletes. If they feel like they can come to you, say like, hey coach, I'm having issues. I'm feeling more depressed. I'm getting injured a lot. I think something's off here. Are you going to have that conversation or just tell them suck it up? Because just telling them to suck it up, buttercup, is going to lead to more issues. And then with those open conversations, can you normalize the menstrual talks? Especially as a male coach, it can be uncomfortable talking about it because it's always been this taboo thing for so long. Well, get over it. Sorry, I wish I could say something else, but get over any uncomfortability you have with it. If you're coaching female athletes, this is something they're going to go through every month. It's something that affects their training every day. So you have to get over this uncomfortability you have with the conversation and make it normalized. Right now, there's been a big push for studies on how to better have strength training or how to periodize a program to deal with periods. Revolutionary, I know. Periodized training for a period. Amazing. So have those conversations, become comfortable with it. Don't be a baby. You're grown. These are kids that you're working with. These are people that look up to you. Have the conversation. The next are health check-ins. This can be just a paper little thing you do once a week, every now and then. Like, how are you feeling, where you're at? Or we could have the deeper conversation of the weigh-in versus not to weigh in. And I go back and forth this because I've seen it done properly and I've also seen it done improperly. Weighing in athletes periodically can work from the monitoring piece. It can help be a data point to say like, hey, something's wrong. You're losing weight all the time, or yep, you're putting on muscle. This is a good thing to see. If your athletes trust you and you've had that conversation, and if you're very forward with the fact that the only people that are going to see this are you and maybe training staff to just make sure things are going there. And when I say training staff, I mean athletic trainers. Just be like, this is for monitoring you. This is just to check to make sure things aren't going wrong. However, you have to have an extreme amount of trust and a lot of buy-in and a lot of other monitoring to make sure you're not causing more issues with it. For you to not weigh in, you do risk the fact of missing drastic body weight changes, but it can get you to the point where you know you're not causing more issues by having them look at the scale. So there's that. Like I said, it comes down to trust, how much the athletes trust you, and also how much you trust yourself to notice any other changes that this activity that you're now doing is causing. Next, you have monitoring training. How are they surviving? How are they hitting their paces? How are they consistently having difficulties with certain things, yet you're still pushing them farther? Where are they at? Just monitoring it. And then lastly, have contact with a nutritionist. Have someone come in periodically to talk to your team about the importance of food and the importance of getting everything from how their muscles recover, how their bones heal, how their brain works better when they have food in their tummy. Just work with someone that knows more than you and don't think you know everything. And then finally, I'm just going to leave with a couple big points, couple things I just want to hammer home. The Female Athlete Triad does not guarantee eating disorder, but a lot of times eating disorders get wrapped into it because they can be very connected. So just watch out. It can cost you your life. It can cost your athlete your life. It can also lead to depression. If your body's not fueled, it starts to go into a dark place. Starts to get suicidal. If you start having these thoughts, if you start getting into a dark place, find high-level professionals. As much as I'm going to be there support for anyone that goes through eating disorders or depression, I am not qualified for it. Your coach is not qualified for it unless they're a clinical psychologist or unless they're a counselor. Find these people that can help you there if you need it. So that's all I have for today's episode of Brain Strength. I just want to make sure that this is an educational piece, an awareness piece, because it happens. And we have to have these conversations so that we can grow from them and really understand how to keep our athletes safe and how to keep ourselves safe. So if there's anything I said today that offended you in any way, I hope you can forgive me. And if you say anything in the comments I find offensive, no, I'll probably forgive you. But until next time, Brain Strength out.